Welcome, welcome. Thank you guys for doing this early in the morning. I appreciate it. I did have some complaints from our brethren on the West Coast that we are not being accommodating, which we will rectify. So my name is Ross Nodurft. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Digital Innovation. We are a nonprofit trade association focused on bridging the gap between our partners in government and our partners in industry to make sure that the government has access to the best, latest, most innovative commercial technology based in the cloud as we can, right? Finding and executing on the problems to enable that acquisition. We're very excited today to have some of our government friends come in and talk to us about what's coming down the pipe. We've long anticipated the update to the FedRAMP memo. We know that it has needed some updating for several years now, as we have had a proliferation of cloud technology enter the marketplace. And this is frankly, it's going to be a seminal moment, but hopefully it won't be the end, right? So we're looking forward to hearing a little preview of what's to come today. And then this is hopefully going to be the first of a two-part series in which we will bring folks back in and talk about, hey, now that we see the memo out there, now that we see things continuing to be implemented, what are the reactions that we're getting, right? So stay tuned. We'll announce the date and time for that as soon as we have it locked in, but it'll be next month sometime. So with that, I would like to bring up the people you're here to see, and we'll start with the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the United States of America, Mr. Drew Myklegard.
Hey, good morning. Just want to start off, this isn't where we usually get to do government panels. It's it has a great view. I don't feel like I'm in my parents' basement. So I'm very happy to be here this morning. Stan's taking calls over here. So I just want to first off thank Ross, Grant, and all of you for coming in this morning. We very much value your feedback, and especially in a two-part series like this. So one, we can come in and I get to meet a lot of new people. I get to see a lot of people that I've worked with before. And then also get to meet a lot of new people and talk to you a little bit ahead of time. And then we'll come back here in a little bit and be able to have another breakfast, hopefully, and chat. Ross mentioned a couple of key things, in our office, and when he was there, and Grant and Krista Rush is here, they really focused on FedRAMP and making it important. It's been about 12 plus years since they wrote the memo. But we understood how important it was. In fact, it was one of our most important memos. So Eric and I naturally thought we could make it better. What good government bureaucrat doesn't think they can do that? But what actually helped, I joke a little bit, my staff never laughs whenever I make jokes. But the importance, there was an initiative for the last couple of years to improve FedRAMP, and we'd really listened to community. But then when the legislation was published at the end of 22, it really started a lot of things in motion. And this was a little bit different in the way that we worked the policy in this area, since usually we'll go ahead and write policy quickly, get it out, and then seek feedback over the next couple of years and see if we need to revise it. Eric and I and Chris took the approach of, let's start moving forward operationally. Since FedRAMP is already in place, let's start building out a really tight relationship with GSA, the agencies, and get them moving forward in the way that we needed, where we thought the program needed to go. And that taught us a lot in the early days about what we needed to listen to and hear. So when we put out the draft memo about 9 months ago, we got great feedback from a lot of you here. And then we received over 100 and some comments, dozens of pages from a couple of companies that had very thoughtful insights. And so it allowed us to go back, go talk to our agency partners and refine that policy. And at the same time, we've been really working hard with GSA in a partnership in the way that OMB usually does when we're rolling out these type of programs and agencies in a couple of key areas. One of them is the transition. So as we transition away from the JAB, which is a Joint Authorization Board, to the FedRAMP board, we're looking at how, it is a very different program than when it started. What do we need to be building for the next 10 years? And so we've built a board that we feel is bringing the best of the JAB leadership as well as like great input from leaders in across the FedCiv as well as DoD. So we're tightly coupled there. We had our first FedRAMP board meeting was it this week? It was earlier this week. Sorry. I feel like, and you guys all feel like there's so much news out there, like I'm living like a month every day. So it was earlier this week. We're going to have another couple of meetings, like every month we're going to be meeting with them. So you'll see a lot of movement forward there. The other areas that we're really focused on is as we move, as the cloud market, and Ross mentioned this, has moved from IaaS to SaaS and PaaS, like how do we help agencies like adopt SaaS faster? So we see two really important areas that we're working on. One is making sure that they're budgeting and implementing the right plans around adopting new SaaS products. So ones that haven't entered the market, how do they secure those either through single authorizations, joint authorizations? We're really excited in some areas about adopting like external frameworks to shorten that authorization process. And those are going to be like our big leaders in like security and mission forward agencies. The other area is reuse. So presumption of adequacy is something that was highlighted in both the legislation and the memo, and that we're very passionate about. Everybody here has heard like authorize once, use many times. It's a little bit more challenging at each agency we've found. That's probably an understatement. Like when I was at Department of Veterans Affairs, FedRAMP had launched our program. I was lucky enough to be able to just authorize a ton of products. And I really stayed true to the fact, like you give me an authorization that's gone through the FedRAMP PMO, I was just like, sign him. And we were able to add on 150 products over a couple of years. And that just moved us forward as an agency and actually made me really popular with the business lines, because at the end of the day, the business lines are trying to drive mission and we're trying to reduce security. So we're really pushing for that supply chain of trust. So when an agency like GSA, Bo Burles over there, VA, HHS, DHS, DOD, when they authorize something, we want to then push that out to the community and to extend that, what we call like the supply chain of trust. So we got a really good person authorizing, you join authorizing, or somebody that's trusted, and then each agency adopts that as fast as possible. So we hope that you all are hearing that. We certainly get to hear a lot of feedback. I think one of the areas that we've been very attuned to and working with Eric and his team over at GSA and together is just around the transition of the JAB product. So companies that invested a lot of money and effort into being JAB authorized, and I absolutely acknowledge that. It wasn't, it is not a scalable sort of, it's not a scalable way of doing authorizations, and we all realize that. But at the same time, we need to ensure that those that went through the process, but they're in the process now, are acknowledged for the efforts they put in as far as like investing in their products and making sure that those hit the JAB standards and that we don't lose that. Just the last couple of things that I want to mention, then Eric's coming up. It's just like these type of feedbacks are really helpful for us. Like we get to hear a lot from agencies. I hear a lot about, individuals that are building great software, but we need to keep hearing from the community. And we hope that you're seeing that we're being more transparent, more responsive. So as you see us out in the community at these type of events talking, please come up, like take some time with us. I definitely want to hear we all want to hear what's good, but more likely I want to hear, like where we need to be putting our resources. GSA has put out a roadmap, so you can see where they're going in next year's, and hopefully they'll be able to talk about that a little bit more. I think sorry, she'll go into the details of that. I'm hopefully not setting you up, but like we have a published roadmap. We've got like the FedRAMP board, the HISCAC, the tag, all these things that are really exciting that we think are moving forward. But if you're not feeling it yet, in the way that you're doing business with the government, helping enable those missions, please let us know where we can improve. So like we're accessible, and we definitely want to be pushing this forward. So thank you for your time today.
Now we'll welcome Eric Mill, who is the Executive Director of Cloud Strategy. Thank you. He's the cloud guy over at GSA.
The cloud, what is that? Hi, I'm Eric Mill at GSA right now. Thank you, Drew. That was a great intro, and I really appreciate that you hit a lot of the points around around how we have tried to make this a process over the last year or two that is, I think, unlike a lot of other executive branch policy and implementation processes. It's definitely not the first time that, for example, OMB has sought public comment on policy. But this might be the first time where we've had the opportunity to put out a draft, and then in between the draft and the final, not only take the time to get 100 or more comments and internalize them, but then also start putting some of these things into practice, seeing what things get the most traction, being able to refine what those priorities are. And then by the time things are finalized, you're actually, you're describing what is happening and what's working well with a lot more confidence. And sometimes you get, and to a large extent, the FedRAMP memo is unlike a lot of other OMB memoranda in that it's sort of describing, in some ways, the constitution of a program, because it was created that way, and that's not really the case for a lot of other policies. I want to talk a little bit about what has changed in the cloud and what that's leading us to do at GSA. So I'm going to make an analogy that some of you will have heard me have made before at different events, but I'm going to make it again anyway. The cloud has, when we talk about the cloud, which is one of the most fuzzy terms that has ever come into the space of computer science and the internet. It is just a cloud on an org chart that was originally meant to represent the internet. And what it has come to mean in the enterprise has changed viscerally in the 13 years since FedRAMP was formed. When FedRAMP was created in 2011, certainly there were web apps out there on the internet, but from an enterprise perspective, what the US government was focused on, what most enterprises were focused on, was the explosion and unlocking of creativity and potential and productivity that was coming out of what we now call infrastructure as a service providers. It transformed the potential of people to make applications, to make software, to make mobile apps, everything in between, and changed what enterprises could do, how they could budget, how they could plan, how they could scale, and what they could do. And so FedRAMP in many ways was designed to make sure that the federal government was not being left behind by this and was able to participate. And by the time I personally joined government in 2014, as a software engineer at the time, the only reason that I even thought it was a good idea to join government is because I could be credibly assured that the government agency that I would be joining would have cloud services that I could use and that I could actually deploy things, and they would be reasonable and reasonably performant. And that actually is what allowed me to see the government as something I might like to do in my life for a time. And it's because of FedRAMP and the work that went into developing FedRAMP and then executing on it that made that possible. And it's a huge success as a program. What has happened in the decade and plus since then is that because of everything that was unlocked by those infrastructure providers, we've now all built a whole lot of things on top of that. Certainly platforms as a service and just a whole lot of software. And so now, 10 years ago, if I had tried to explain to my non-technical family what the cloud was, I would have tried to explain that kind of infrastructure as a service, data centers, fungible computing and APIs would have been very difficult. And now, if I am talking to my family about what I do for a living, which is very difficult in general, I would just try to explain the cloud as it's just all the websites that you use, and it's now splintered into many thousands of pieces, and each of those different applications is, instead of trying to empower an organization or a person to give you the opportunity to do 100 more things, each of these is trying to give you the opportunity to do one or a few things really well. And that has also transformative implications for the security concerns for those services. The vulnerabilities and the threats and the architecture and everything that's interesting about software is almost nothing like what's interesting about building a data center or a hyperscaler on top of that material. And so as a result, FedRAMP and GSA, there's implications to scale. We now have just many thousand, orders of magnitude more entities to care about and to work with than we did 10 years ago. And we also have to be much more sophisticated in how we actually like oversee and conduct security authorizations and certifications on those services. So, we've been pretty public with some of the ways that we are starting to go about tackling that problem. We've published a public roadmap that I won't go into detail on, but you may hear some of those things from our team here on the panel. But one of the things I'm actually the proudest of is that we are really investing in technical expertise and advice for the program. It's been great to work with OMB to set up our technical advisory group, which has a stellar array of federal practitioners with serious technical backgrounds in identity, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and real application security concepts. But we're a little careful here about talking about hiring until everything is done and on the dotted line. But I'm pretty comfortable saying that by the end of this year, we will actually have like a real technical team inside FedRAMP in the program office, as full-time feds, with people with a diverse set of engineering skill sets, stuff in natural language processing and artificial intelligence and data science. And it's going to make us capable of really executing on the automation vision that folks have been pushing forward for a number of years now. In that relay race that has been ongoing, I foresee us really becoming a delivery organization. And it's also just going to make us smarter and better able to reason about the subtleties and implications that happen in these compliance processes when you have everything that feels good on paper and everything that is just supposed to make sense. When things come into conflict anyway, because the world is more complex than that, we need to be a team and an organization that is able to see that and bring people to the best risk and security outcome of that situation. So that's what we're focused on doing here, and I hope that's what is coming through in our work, and really looking forward to the rest of the panel and then getting to know folks in the room. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you, Drew. Before we do the panel, I'm going to say a couple things. One, the fact that the team is here today speaks to what they're saying right now. They actually fully and truly believe that industry and the government are partners in this effort, and they want feedback in the process to make sure that it is working as well as it can. And that's not just Drew and Eric, it's their teams that are here, we'll hear from the panel. It's the folks that are here who were part of the FedRAMP program. It is pervasive in a way, frankly, that, I've been around this for almost a decade now, which is scary to say, but it's pervasive in a way that is significantly different than it used to be, right? The processes that they're running for federal comments, they mean it. They read every single comment. So I want folks to really hear what Drew and Eric are saying and really realize that they do value all of your feedback, both online and at home. So please continue to reach out to them and interact with them. They want to hear what's working and what's not, and they want to have those discussions. There may be disagreements, but those are healthy. There's a lot of passion around this program, and I think it's on both sides. So continue to engage. That's one. Two, the other thing I want to recognize, and I'm not going to get a chance to do this before or after the panel wraps, is that FedRAMP as a program is significant in a way that I think people often who focus on federal government procurement miss or forget. FedRAMP has set a precedent that is accepted in a number of venues that we don't hear about and we don't often discuss. There are plenty of anecdotal stories that I hear on a very regular basis that says, hey, I had a FedRAMP authorization, and therefore I was able to quickly go into a market that was regulated in the US that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get to. It is a differentiator in a marketplace that has nothing to do with federal government procurement. The state level, some of the work that's happening at the state level is very much looking at the work and accepting the work that is done through the authorization process at FedRAMP. And that is extremely, extremely valuable to the folks in industry in our association that are supporting those public sector institutions. And that's not saying anything about international. There are international government bodies today that are looking and waiting with bated breath for the reauthorization of this program. And that is, we are today and going forward, they are setting standards that are going to help drive security practices across the globe. So I think it's important for us to recognize the magnitude of what we're doing today. With that said, let's bring up our panelists. So we have Laura Gerhardt from OMB, we have Zari Singer from GSA, and we have Stan Lowe from the Department of Interior. If you guys come and grab a seat. Hopefully hopefully you guys can see him online. I'm gonna come sit next to him. So just as a reminder, we're gonna have a couple of questions toward the end. I've got a series of questions here we're gonna get through, and then I've got a couple of questions. We'll open it up for a few questions at the very end. Make sure you're using your mics at your table if you have them. And the folks here, right now your mics at the table are live, they're green, so you should be able to hear them.
This is very like a hearing. Thank you, Congressman, for the question.
Well, I'm sitting next to you, so that should hopefully.
We call that the splatter zone.
There you go. There you go. There
If
you
somebody's
go.
getting hammered, you just sort of like.
All right, so let's start. We'll start easy. We'll get everybody warmed up. Let's start. If we go down the line, just introduce yourself, talk about your position in your organization, and then we'll get into the real questions.
Sure. So I'm Stan Lowe. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Department of the Interior. I just came back into the government after an absence of about 7 years, where I was serving as a global CISO for a software development company, a SaaS company in New Jersey. And prior to that, I was a global CISO for Zscaler. And then a biotech, and then my last government gig before that was the Deputy Assistant Secretary and Chief Information Security Officer at the VA, where I withdrew. The Interior has a huge mission, and it's sometimes referred to as the cats and dogs department, because anything that doesn't fit anywhere gets put in the Interior. We have everything from wild horses and burros that we manage and sell and curate, to offshore energy, to satellites, to wildland firefighting, to an education, a fiduciary, a large bank. So it's a huge scope of responsibility. So it's been pretty interesting so far.
That's great. Laura?
I'm Laura Gerhardt, and I'm the Director of Technology, Modernization, and Data on Drew's team at OFCIO. And prior to OFCIO, I was at GSA working at 18F, an embedded digital startup. And actually, my first project there was working on the FedRAMP marketplace. I was the technical lead. And so I think when we talk about industry engagement, that was really sort of a first pass at making sure there was customer experience and making sure that the customers, both industry and agencies, understood what the marketplace is, and really grateful for the FedRAMP team that's continued that product, but really also gave an understanding of what are some of the challenges with FedRAMP and what are some of the opportunities. And it's been really great to shift in the past year over to OFCIO to sort of take that a level up from sort of the technical implementation. It also means I know the data that goes through the FedRAMP marketplace better than anyone else. And taking that and really informing the policy we're working in collaboration with the public comments. Since stepping into the Director of Technology Modernization role this year, have been really focusing on sort of key areas of accelerating mission delivery, aligning resources, and unlocking data. FedRAMP seems part and parcel to that, especially with this pivot towards SaaS, accelerating mission delivery and supporting solutions that have been proven in the commercial marketplace and bringing them into the federal marketplace, so that agencies can deliver on mission, aligning resources, streamlining the authorization process through the presumption of adequacy, so that agencies aren't managing or reduplicating the footprint of existing authorizations. And especially once we can leverage those capabilities, unlocking the agency data sort of to fulfill those agency mission. So FedRAMP has been a huge part of my time at OFCIO, but just a small piece in a broader portfolio.
I'm Zari Singer. I am FedRAMP's agency engagement lead. I officially joined the team in February, but have been sort of in and around the program in lots of different capacities for the last 5 years or so. I also worked closely with the team to help push out our new roadmap. And a big part of what I do on a daily basis, in addition to just talking to as many CSPs and agencies as possible about FedRAMP is helping to make sure that as a team, we're delivering on the commitments that we have outlined in that roadmap.
Sorry, thank you. And so
That's really like a hearing.
there you go. There you go. We wanted to make Stan feel comfortable and welcome. So here's a couple things. You all know each other. You work with each other every day. I'm going to ask questions that are at specific people, but you all have opinions on those same questions. Please feel free to pipe up, right? Say, talk amongst yourselves. You don't want to hear from me. So
She's like, right? And she's leaning away from me.
let's start with Laura. Let's go back to you real quick to start off. I think one of the things that we are, anxiously anticipating is what's new and what's different in the FedRAMP memo that we're going to see coming down the pipe. So if you could tell us kind of what you think the changes are going to be based on from the draft that you released to now, we'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So again, when we heard in the comments, overall interest and sort of clarity of some of the things that were introduced in the legislation and the memo itself, in particular, mentioned already the presumption of adequacy, really making sure that a cloud service provider that has gone through the authorization process, it's understood with agencies that that is good enough for them, and presuming that the security controls are adequate. We're trying to clarify where that is applicable, and in particular, making sure that it is as broad as possible within there. I think, again, you've also heard us talk a lot about reuse. In particular, really excited about the use of external security frameworks, like you just mentioned. FedRAMP has a wonderful life beyond the federal enterprise. I think similarly, we can be looking outside of the federal enterprise of how we might be leveraging those. Again, a lot of that will help streamline the authorization process by reducing rework and hopefully be making the opportunity to expand the marketplace to small businesses that wouldn't have the resources to sort of support multiple compliance processes. And I think finally, too, in hearing from the process, this is not necessarily in the memo, but as Drew and Eric said, making sure that we're able to recognize the work that was previously done under job preparation and sort of that the designations will sort of continue for an interim amount of time.
That's great. Zara, first of all, you have any comments on that? Anything you want to?
Nothing. That was great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's got it written down,
question-
so it's like,
Question for you, and I'm going to ask kind of two of the questions we talked about together. So you guys have recently released some things as part of your roadmap. I think people in this room are generally familiar, but if you could give the high-level bullets of the two of the pilot program and the automate announcements, just give the top lines of that. I think it would be helpful for folks who are listening right now.
Sure. So we recently rolled out one of our first pilots, our Agile Delivery Pilot. And I think probably everyone here knows this, but not everybody knows about FedRAMP, that CSPs who are authorized, anytime they want to make any sort of security impacting change, that has to go through an approval process. And we recognize that that can be very, very, very cumbersome, both in terms of our agencies who want access to new features and for our cloud providers.
Mm-hmm.
So what we are looking at piloting is a non-blocking process that will allow CSPs to roll out new features without having to get advanced approval. They will still have to do their own independent or their own risk assessment as part of that process and provide that to agencies. And the features need to be opt-in for agencies, but it's something that we think can happen without having that sort of blocking approval process. So we're really excited about that. We think that that's going to be a great way to move toward the change that we want to have with the significant change process in general, and really allow those features to get to agencies faster.
That's great. And I'll ask you about the automate in a second, but just a quick point of clarification. One, if people are interested in submitting for the pilot, it's due when?
I believe tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yes.
So you guys can leave here and
24 hours.
Yes, and we have we rolled out a whole pilot page, which is going to be the place where you can find information about all our pilots. We have our coming soon one on the digital authorization package as well there. But it has all the information about the criteria and how to apply all of that.
Great, thank you. If you don't follow FedRAMP's blog, it's a hot one. You need to get on it. So,
I'm awake.
Zari, tell us a little bit about the Automate page that you launched.
Yes. So we have launched our new automate.fedramp.gov page. It's sort of a developer hub of sorts. It's meant to be the home for all of the resources that CSPs would need to create digital authorization packages, and developers would need to create the tools to make a digital authorization package. So it's meant to kind of satisfy both of those stakeholder groups. Anybody can go on that and issue pull requests, provide feedback on the resources that you see there. It's going to be updated regularly. We're really excited about that as being kind of the place to get in the weeds with us on all things OFCIO and all things automation.
And one thing too about getting industry feedback, I think I've seen a lot of pilots for digital authorization packages not quite make it across the finish line, in part because, like, as we all know in the assessing space, it's an iterative process. And when we're rapidly iterating, right now, a lot of the process defaults back to Word. And so want to get feedback from you all in particular. How can we just make that hurdle? And these where previous attempts haven't quite gotten there. And this is a great opportunity to really sort of engage in that and help understand that this process to move it forward rather than end up being a bunch of Word documents passed along. So really, this is an investment to getting to that sort of automated future that we're really hoping for.
Stan, I know you have something you want to say.
Well, that's a big, so one of the things that, having been on both sides of this process, both on the authorization side and on industry side, pushing things through the process. One of the things that, I'm sorry, I can lean forward here. I thought I had a big enough mouth where everybody could hear me. Is we need to make sure that when we're doing stuff like that, that we take into account that it's going to cost them money to do that. And to your point is we've done this several times and it's not made it. So they're making an investment on the assumption that they're going to get something on the back end of that, which is some type of FedRAMP authorization. And if it doesn't work, it's going to be really hard to convince folks because, again, everybody, past behavior is a predictor of future outcomes. So making sure that when they roll into something like that, or somebody like an agency like me says, hey, I want to participate in that process, that we at least have some type of guaranteed outcome. So one, the investment that both organizations are making is actually guaranteed to have something out there. Because right now, the way it sets is they know, even though it's an inconsistent process and it's long, if they do the current process, at the end, they'll get something out of it. It may be far distant in the future, but investing in something that is proof of concept, you're asking them to spend money and you're asking the departments to spend money. So from my perspective, yeehaw, anything that we can do to improve the FedRAMP process, even on the margins, will be astronomically welcome. But making sure that the folks that enter into any type of pilot like that they're assured of some type of outcome where they can actually enter the marketplace.
All right, Stan.
And everybody else will take it.
Stan, let's stick with you for a second. So one of the things that we talk about at the Alliance for Digital Innovation often is, how do I find a sponsor in the federal government? And Zari, I believe you and the FedRAMP PMO in general are open to speaking with people about that. Is that fair?
Yes.
So
yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yes, Congressman.
We
But
love
Stan,
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So look, the PMO is willing to help have those conversations. But Stan, you're an agency, right? So what are the drivers for you to sponsor? And I'm going to ask this in a multiple part question. We've talked about this already. This past year, the past couple of years, how many is Department of Interior sponsoring on a regular basis? Going forward, how many do you see the Department of Interior sponsoring? And then why? Why?
Why? It's the start of a song. So Interior, again, I've been there 10 months now. So in the past year, we've sponsored one. And coming up in the end of this year, we may end up actually doing 3 total this year. We'll see. But going in from this year into next year, we'll probably do 1 or 2. So for a total of maybe 4 in the next, from last year to the FY25 coming up. What we're looking for, and again, I'm perfectly willing to sponsor anybody. However, there has to be a operational need for me. It's not like I can just willy-nilly sponsor whoever comes down the pike. Ostensible, when we originally envisioned the JAB, that's what the JAB was for. For those folks that couldn't find a FedRAMP sponsor or an agency sponsor that had an immediate emergent need for that particular technology, that was what the JAB was for. That didn't work out that way. So now individual organizations and companies are walking around trying to enter the marketplace by obtaining sponsorship at the departmental or the agency level. And for me, the way I look at this is I have to have a need, because it costs me resources to do an authorization, and it costs me resources to do the sponsorship. So I actually have to have some type of operational need for that particular technology. We're fortunate enough that at least in my department, that my CIO is very willing for me to do things like that. So going out and talking to companies that are looking to enter the federal marketplace, that have an emergent technology that we can use to help me drive efficiency into my organization and or drive down cost in an ever shrinking budget environment. So that's how we look at things, and most CISOs and CIOs around the federal space look at it pretty much the same way. They're just not going to sponsor somebody because it costs resources on both sides. So it has to meet some type of operational need or an emergent emergent need that they actually need to get somebody in on almost as quickly as they possibly can. That's how sponsorship happens, because it really ends up, it's not sponsorship, it's partnership. Because you're actually partnering with a company to help get them through the FedRAMP process, and at the same time get you what you need to do to be comfortable with the risk, to be able to accept what their assertions are with regards to the state of their cybersecurity programs.
So Laura, this gets into kind of a broader resourcing question, right? So as you're looking at the changes to the FedRAMP memo, what types of resourcing changes are you all thinking agencies may need to ask for?
Yeah, so precisely to Stan's point, we really do recognize that agencies are going to be a driver for a large part of future authorizations. And so we're really trying to make sure that agencies are reflecting the costs of the authorization, so that when there is those unmet operational needs, which we know exist in agencies, that they have the resources to support those authorizations. And so as we go into the future, we're really trying to drive home that we're also about to kick off a number of agency roadshows, so that they can understand their role and make sure that they convey to us where there are those resource needs to sponsor the agency authorizations going forward. I think kind of tying back again to what Zari said around also, and Stan as well, is like the automation is also part of the ecosystem, and agencies are a huge piece of that as well. And so in particular, as we're looking for these future resourcing needs, we're also really ensuring that future agency budgets incorporate some of the interoperability requirements for these digital authorization packages. In particular, them updating their system inventory tools and their governance risk and compliance GRC tools, so that it really can be an ecosystem, and that when they go through this process and make that investment, that there's somewhere to land, right? That's another huge piece of that. And really with OMB and our sort of central role, working very closely with all the agencies that we're going to be taking the packages and moving those forward, so that the ecosystem and that speed, what we hope for, that interoperability and that automation can be realized, and that it isn't just a once over to FedRAMP and then there's still a slow moving process for reuse, and especially, or they work with an agency and then it's a slow moving process over to FedRAMP, really accelerating that and driving that through this tooling and creating this ecosystem, and really making sure that there is going to be support from that for the resource
And that'll help
perspective.
with the expectation of consistency, because it really depends on who writes your paperwork and who looks at it, and whether that person's there. But so consistency and temporal bounding of the expectations of when you drop a package in, that it will be handled in a consistent process for everybody, and then come out with in some reasonable period of time. So I think automation is going to help that. The second fun part of that is then convincing the departmental and agencies and bureau office CISOs that what you do and what is being done is sufficient to meet their risk appetites. And so that's an education thing, and that's going to be something that you, Drew, and Zari, and all have to. That's what the purpose of the roadshow is, to go out and to educate those folks, because CISOs aren't. We can always say no, but we can sometimes never say yes. And that's typically because there are other people other than us that are authorizing officials. That a lot of authorizing officials and a lot of departments are not in information technology. They're out in the mission areas. So the idea to be able to create a process that allows the missions to have access to emergent tools and technologies to allow them to deliver mission is going to be critically important. And the other part that I'm tickled pink about is the fact of being able to get
Microphone.
I'm sorry. Am I being yelled at?
No, just I'm our online people, our people.
Oh, there are people online.
There's a lot of people online.
Wow, that's what the crack of dawn looks like out
there,
there, folks.
There you go.
So, and again, being able to add features and functionality without having to impact an entire security boundary and go through the entire process is going to be critically important, because new technologies and new features come out all the time.
And 2 points of that. One, inheritance is a passion project of mine, having come from sort of a development perspective. And if we're really shifting towards SaaS adoption, you really have to take inheritance. Adoption is going to be key in that, because you'll be able to do threat modeling for more granular, and you'll really be able to stack on authorizations in a way that is really quite challenging with the current authorization and assessment package.
So Laura, we are, you guys are talking in a language. No. This is great. But I want to make sure that we're being clear for the people who are online. When you say inheritance, I know what you mean, but talk a little bit about what that means.
As a passion project, I just go straight into it. Inheritance is effectively, I think, as Drew and Eric talked around, really initially when FedRAMP started, it was focused on IaaS providers. Most SaaS and PaaS providers are operating on top of an existing and oftentimes, FedRAMP authorized infrastructure. Because they have those existing FedRAMP authorizations, and we really are focused on reducing rework, inheritance basically, especially sort of at the system security control level, will allow you to incorporate what has already been done. My favorite example as a software developer, coming from a software development, is I don't, as a software developer, want to have to think about the physical security controls or the redundancy of the backup generator of my data center. That should be a given for me. And for me to go through that, I should be able to accept what has already been done on that. And so what automation really provides an opportunity for is really the marrying from a documentation perspective of those underlying controls, which have been assessed and documented, into what is my net new product, which in this case, in this scenario, would be sort of a net new web app SaaS product.
So what I'm hearing, just from going back to the funding piece, is that there's going to be a roadshow. OMB is going to be working with agencies to budget for the differences in the memo going forward. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the OMB process, it is a long one, right? So this is not something that we're going to see pop into agency budgets this year. In 2025, people may be able to shake loose some funds, right, Stan? Right?
Yeah.
If we turn you upside down. But it's going to be a 18-month process, right?
I think that's optimistic.
So it's optimistic, but it could be done. Go ahead, Zari.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the sort of sponsorship piece. One of the things that I think we at FedRAMP view as part of our job is we want to make it easier for you to do this. That's a big part of what I feel like our job is. And one of the things that we're hoping will help with that is this idea of multiple agencies coming together to work on an authorization. We want to design that in a way where it's actually less work for everybody. And how can we look at establishing cohorts of agencies that have shared needs, shared missions, and can kind of look across the landscape and say, what tools do we collectively want to bring in that are going to be useful for all of us, where we can share the load a bit? And that's a piece that we're hoping to help with.
And one thing on like the prioritization, one thing that FedRAMP worked really expediently to produce recently was the emerging technology framework. In particular, this was an item that came out of the AI executive order in order to prioritize generative AI capabilities. And so 3 different types of AI capabilities are now being prioritized through August 1st, is it? What is I have it here, August 31st, in order to make sure that we want to make sure that we are meeting the needs. And right now there's a strong interest in generative AI capabilities. And again, there's sort of a 4th category for if it's specifically using an application protocol interface. But again, there's strong interest from the administration on these tools, and we're creating pathways to sort of prioritize that within FedRAMP.
That's good. All right. So just to close out the funding, I think industry, and you guys can't say this, I can. Industry needs to be in the position and ready to advocate as agencies produce those budget requests, as well as continue to advocate with Congress for funding and growth in funding for the FedRAMP PMO in whatever pathway that looks like, whether it's the Federal Citizen Services Fund or another pathway. We need to be ready to help advocate. So let's move on to another interesting topic. Laura, you mentioned that the memo, and we'll come to you, Stan, on this too. Laura, you mentioned that you anticipate there being a way to kind of address the transition away from the Joint Authorization body, the JAB, to these new alternative pathways. Can you and Zari kind of walk us through what you anticipate that looking like?
I'm actually going to pass it over to Zari.
Great.
Sure. Yeah. So as we think about what that transition looks like, there's sort of multiple things that we're holding. One of them is this idea of the presumption of adequacy and having a trusted market and one understanding of what a FedRAMP authorization is and what that really means. So that is the direction that we are moving in, is one FedRAMP authorization, and that meaning kind of the same thing across the board. And we recognize that the work and the investment that has gone in for many of the CSPs who have gone through our process with the JAB as being one that is, incredibly rigorous, and that was a fact. That was something that many of the vendors in this room have done, and so we are looking at making sure that that is something that is a visible sort of historic status. So that's something that's available. You want to add to that?
And my understanding that visible status will be within the FedRAMP marketplace.
Yes.
So.
That's great. Thank you. So that's good. I think a lot of people will be happy and excited to hear that for sure. So Stan, I want to ask you about just general risk acceptance and how you view the evolution and how you think it's going to impact your view of risk acceptance. And what I mean by that more directly is currently today we've got agency ATOs, we've got JAB PATOs. When the memo comes out, we've talked about the presumption of adequacy and there being one ATO. How is that going to change your view of leveraging other people's pathways?
So it may not change my view of this, because again, I'm a little unusual in that if there's an ATO out there that's been done by anybody, I'm okay with it. I'll take it. I'll take the paperwork, and I'll just assign the folks who are going to take care of the cover off on the control families for whatever aspect of that we're using. Where this is going to help me, and where I hope it helps me, is with the workforce who were brought up in a compliance environment, to help ease them into this new paradigm of, hey, listen, you don't have to redo all of this stuff. You don't have to redo the privacy impact assessment. You don't have to redo the system security plan. You don't have to do the accreditation authorization. You don't have to go through all their POAM. If the ATO's been done, you have to that's sufficiency. That is sufficient for our needs. And what I'm hoping is when the memo comes out, that alleviates a lot of that internal angst, like, hey, listen, I'm taking on this risk for myself. And I keep telling my folks is like, you're not taking on anything, I am, and I'm okay with it. So let's kick this football down the field and get on with it, because we need to be able to deliver tools and technologies to the mission in the most secure manner possible within the risk appetite of the organization. So that's what I'm hoping for. Because right now I'm on board with that. I mean, if there's an ATO out there, I don't care who it's done by. It's done by the Pig Farmers Inspection Bureau. I'm okay with that, because effectively, you know, they've probably gone out and hired the same people that we did to get that done. You know, you're either, you know, some type of 3PAO or some type of organization that does the packaging. We don't do the packaging ourselves. I mean, we hire contractors to do that. And it's probably the same group that did that one that would do ours. So why, and they're doing the same level of due diligence on those packages that they would do for ours. So why do we care? And again, it's all about control. It's all about making people more comfortable with decisions that they're making, because, you know, again, most of the bureaucracy is risk averse. You know, they're afraid of getting spanked for making a decision. And I'm like, hey, listen, nobody here is going to get popped for, you know, if you make a decision, at least you're making a decision, you know, do something, because if you're not failing every once in a while, you're not learning. So, you know, using that as sort of permission from the big house to allow us to do stuff is going to be critical for me to be able to push that down into the workforce to make them more comfortable with what we're doing, because, you know, I'm already okay with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think it's important perspective that Stan, once he receives the memo, is not, it doesn't turn on a dime. He's got to then go convince the bureau level folks who own their own risk at those levels to work with him on that process.
And they really are. I mean, they're looking for some relief on this, because again, they had folks in their organizations that operate in the same manner. It was like, well, you know, and this says this, and, you know, the FedRAMP memo says this, and this says this, and this, and they're basically lawyering up through the application, a judicious application of bureaucracy.
All right. They're not actually hiring lawyers, just FYI. All right. So, Zari, I want to continue on the JAB piece. I think there's another aspect to it, right? So we've have folks who were, you know, in a queue for a JAB PATO. How is the FedRAMP PMO working with some of those companies right now? What does that look like? What should companies who are listening expect to hear or not hear?
I mean, we have made contact. We're actively in touch with all of those companies. We're working with all of them directly to, basically complete the commitment that we made in the first place, which is to take them through a FedRAMP process. That's going to look a little bit different for each of those companies, sort of based on their unique situation. But the bottom line is we're taking them through the process. It will either be, in some cases, that will be directly with FedRAMP. In other cases, that will be with one or more agencies working together on an authorization. It sort of depends upon that unique situation for that CSP, but we are actively working with those vendors and talking to them on sometimes every day, basically.
So Laura, we've covered automation, we've covered alternative pathways, we've covered presumption of adequacy. What else should we be anticipating in the memo that we haven't really talked about or dove into?
I think probably the other thing are some of the things that we've already started to operationalize, and that's the roles and responsibilities.
Yep.
The new sort of FedRAMP ecosystem looks a little bit different. I think the key thing we've already chatted about is the sort of transition from the JAB to the FedRAMP board. As Drew mentioned, we had our first meeting. We're actively kicking that off and operationalizing that. Similarly, the technical advisory group we've stood up, I think, was it last month? And we've been actively engaging them. Again, they're going to be really supporting as all of the process changes and sort of the guidance that the FedRAMP level guidance that comes out there. And then again, the agency responsibilities, we're explicitly making sure that the interoperability is reflected in there, as well as making sure that NIST is holding continuing to work on some of the actual protocol work for the automation. So I think in addition to those activities, it's really around the governance structure and the advisory boards that are created. And I think the other thing would be around continuous monitoring. Again, we've sort of sorry talked about the non-blocking pilots. I think really making sure, now that the FedRAMP program is what we always get the year wrong, 13 years old. That
December of 2011.
Yeah. So some of these some of these authorizations really, reflect the early versions of FedRAMP, and making sure that as we really try to emphasize the presumption of adequacy, that agencies have that confidence throughout the life of a maintained authorization. And Conmon's really critical to that. Part of that will be, making sure that we can, the FedRAMP program can take on some of the Conmon work so that agencies can feel more comfortable taking on the initial authorization, that they're not bound to like holding this authorization in perpetuity until cloud is, equated to dinosaurs. And really making sure that it also reflects sort of an agile change management process and updating sort of the significant change request processes.
That's great. All right, so we have about 10-ish minutes left, give or take. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I promise while they're not on those submitted ones, it'll be fine. The question one, you've got a couple of different stakeholder groups, and this is OMB and GSA, right? You've got your internal stakeholders in departments and agencies, and you've got your external stakeholders, whether it's the folks who are doing the 3PAO process, whether it's the industry's CSPs that are going through the process, et cetera. Can you talk about the different ways in which you guys are currently offering opportunities for feedback and input? And I'm thinking through everything from talk about what the FSCAC is, talk about how you guys are leveraging the FedRAMP board, talk about some of that stuff. So if in whatever order you'd like to go.
Sure. So our FSCAC, or our Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee, is the sort of way for both industry, and we have representation from both industry and government there. That is a way to engage with us in a public capacity as part of that process, share public comments, that sort of thing. In terms of all of the work on our roadmap, a thing that we started doing this year that I think we feel like has worked well in terms of getting questions and feedback is a public forum format where we host an event, whether it's on our roadmap or on a new release, and sort of talk through the elements of that and have questions, comments, and have the leads for that really, present on those. We also are doing public comments for all of the major things that we're pushing out. We're also working with our various stakeholder groups on the development of those things. So our technical advisory group, as an example, where we worked with OMB to select the members for that they all have sort of really amazing technical expertise that can help in the development of the guidance that we push out. So we're engaging them there. And then we also have on the agency side, we have our agency liaison group. So we'll do public forums, and then we'll do meetings just with our agency liaisons, which are sort of our group of FedRAMP experts across the government that are our point of contacts. We have over 100 of those that we share all this information with, get their feedback, and make sure that they're engaged in the process as well. So lots of different avenues.
And I think to build on, in particular, how OMB has been working with the FSCAC recently, we know that there are going to be, we've laid out the vision, we're starting to operationalize it. We know some of the general challenges that folks in amongst those stakeholder groups have experienced with FedRAMP. But as we're sort of proposing these, we really want that feedback. We're having conversations with the leadership of the FSCAC, and they're bringing it to the broader membership. So that really is a great avenue for us to hear how we might engage and how we might test things out in coordination with the GSA team. Similarly, I've already mentioned the agency roadshow, so we're really sort of engaging with that. We're having, as part of the public comment period, we had rounds of town halls. We're also planning on doing a number of public engagement as we move to finalize this memo as well.
And DOD, I know there's representation on the FedRAMP board and FSCAC as well.
On the FedRAMP board, we have 2 members. We have the DOD CISO as well as the CISO of the Air Force. So we're making sure that it's not just reflecting a FedCiv, that it really is the full federal agency community.
Great. Stan, There's a lot of things I'd like to ask you, but I'll behave myself. Tell me,
Jason's out there.
tell me what, when you go to implement this, what are the things, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but what are the things that you are going to need as a agency, a CFO Act agency CISO to be successful in the implementation?
So sometimes, and again, oftentimes we, and I talk a lot about the bureaucracy and stuff like that, is when we write these things, when we write the guidance, we use as plain language as possible. That will help drive down the ability to interpret what is being said with regards to the meanings of certain words. Because I have people that parse sentences, and I'm like, well, that's not what they mean. But when we write things with an eye towards the practical implementation of the policy, that will be critical, because oftentimes in the government we write things and we use language and we use processes that can never actually be implemented practically in an operational environment. So what I'm looking for, and what'll make it easy for everybody, is when we're writing these types of things, that we look at them like, how would an agency take this and actually operationalize it? Use it with as little effort as possible. And that's really the big thing. It's not money. It's not, a bunch of different things. It's actually using policy to drive operations rather than using, policy to drive bureaucracy. That's going to be critical to getting this stuff adopted. And it's also going to pay dividends in the long run, because there will be a lot less room for interpretation of the language within the different the different civilian agencies, the bureaus and the offices. It's pretty plain. Hey, this does mean this. It does not mean something else, and it's within a sense. And so the practical application of that policy is very well understood and very well defined. That literally, if nothing else gets done, that's going to be critically important.
All right, so we've got time for about 3 or 4 questions from the audience. Here's the deal. You have microphones. You got to speak into the microphones for the people that aren't here. Sorry, people that aren't here, you should come in person next time.
Ouch.
So use the microphones, introduce yourself, tell them where you're coming from so that they know the background of the question that they're being asked. Yeah, so raise your hand, I'll call on you in order. So we got,
no, correct.
All right, we got 4 questions. So we'll start Rob, and then Karen, then Chris, and then GP.
They don't have a mic.
Well, you can pick it up, Rob.
First, just want to say sorry. Thanks so much. Process. Appreciate that. Second, I just want to dive into the resources question a little bit. Given that we're probably 3 quarters of the way through 2026 budget bills, we're saying competency resourcing agency level.
So just in case that didn't go through, the question was around resourcing and the timing with resourcing, and given where we are in the cycle for appropriations, when do we anticipate actually seeing it show up?
I think at this point we can just say it will be in the future budget builds.
Yeah. So yeah, look, I can talk more than they can right now because I think they're probably in negotiations, but we are in a interesting time frame from appropriation standpoint. We don't know what's going to happen until after the elections. This is something we talk about at our trade association all the time, and are happy if you're not currently a member of ADI, you should join, because this is the type of stuff that we can give you a little bit better understanding and answer to. So next question. Who did I say next? Karen? All right. Is it turned on? There you go. Just start talking into it.
So Karen Lawton from Coal Fire. I have a couple of questions, but I'll go quick. So the first one is, there's been talk about bringing back what used to be called the CSP supplied option within the marketplace, because, we have tons of customers that are sitting there, they're ready to go. They've been through their 3PAO assessment. but they still can't find a sponsor, and they're paying for this environment for nothing. They're not getting any income from it. And so it's like, that would be an awesome way for them to be able to at least advertise, like, we're rip roaring and ready to go. Like, I know they have FedRAMP ready, but then you're waiting another year or so for them to go through the assessment, go through the PMO review and everything. So bringing that back, I think, would be a huge for some of these CSPs who have gone through everything, but still can't find that sponsorship to give that visibility. Is there any talk about bringing that back?
There is talk about bringing, the PMO, or sorry, the FedRAMP team doing program authorizations. What exactly that will look like in terms of criteria, precedent setting, all of that is not right now established. That's something that it's on our roadmap for FY25, early in FY25, as kind of making that more available, more broadly available. Right now, how we're looking at using the program authorization is for the CSPs that have been in this queue for the JAB as kind of a release valve there. So that's our focus right now. But beyond that, that's absolutely the intent, is thinking about how do we more strategically make that available to the market.
Great.
That's amazing. Thank you. And then one last question. So you have all of these initiatives, which sound amazing, and they have all of us really excited. Do you guys, even if they haven't been published internally, have success metrics of how you're measuring whether or not they're actually doing anything? Like, for instance, right now, the queue for getting through the process right now is 7-8 months long for a CSP. Like, is there, we're trying to get to 1 month, or so 30 days, and like, now we get 100 authorizations a year. We're trying to get to 1,000. Like, do you guys have those defined internally, and do you plan on publishing them?
Actually, very imminently, we will be publishing for public comment a new set of KPIs that we would like all of your feedback on. So you will see those come out on our blog. So to answer your question, yes, we do have some internal ones, and we want to have our stakeholders weigh in on how we are measuring ourselves, like both from a performance standpoint and from a customer experience standpoint, and making sure that we have metrics that actually capture the true customer experience that our CSPs and agencies have. So those are imminent. We're going to be putting those out. We would love your comment on them. We would love suggestions on things that we may have missed. So please stay tuned for more on that.
That's great. Thank you so much.
That's good. Check that blog, folks. I'm telling you. Chris.
Hey, good morning. There we go. Slide here.
First time caller.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chris Teresh at Google Cloud. Great to meet you all. Thank you for being here. Well, and I really am excited that you're going to put out some KPIs, because I think that dovetails into the question that I was going to ask, or I'm about to. Just even understanding the benchmarking, like, a lot of us CSPs are massive, and there's a lot of people inside who are like, we're going too slow. And it's like, right, but actually we may be going faster than someone else. So like, that data being public would be helpful, I think, in educating all of the people that are involved in this process inside some of us really massive CSPs. The question I had is, like, what is the thought that you all are giving to incentivizing adoption of the FedRAMP memo changes? Like, in particular, if we want reciprocity, if you want the agencies to do more things, has there been a thought to leveraging FSMA metrics, for example, setting some targets? Funding is great, but like, the reality is, like, that's a long tail. What we really usually do in government, right, is we sort of reprioritize. And so what sort of thought around reprioritizing some of the targets for agencies has been given in ways to give other positive incentive structures to agencies? Thank you.
I think we're really looking at what those are at this point and having internal deliberations, in particular, like looking at the KPIs that are being developed and sort of looking at what realistic targets and how we might. I feel like often in conversations with Drew, I'm like, but what are the carrots? And making sure that we're reflecting both carrots and sticks in terms of agency adoption. Mm-hmm. So we're right now in conversations about those.
Great. GP.
Good morning, and thank you for this session. I'm GP with Stack Armor. I'm also an ADI board member, and so thank you very much for doing this panel. I guess in the context of building on Chris's question, I think you mentioned agency road shows. we've been looking at a lot of the data on the FedRAMP marketplace on, what we call sponsorship patterns. And I think something that was called out today is important is, we see a heavy concentration of agencies, even CFO Act agencies aren't necessarily as active as we would like to see on the sponsorship side. But I guess the question is a larger question in the context of ADI particularly, is we see FedRAMP as a digital transformation program that brings in commercial best of breed technologies to the government. So I guess in the context of agency outreach, what is it that we collectively can do to promote agencies being able to talk about the benefits of FedRAMP, consumption of FedRAMP-based products? One of the things I've always had is sort of this back of the envelope calculation showing that FedRAMP has demonstrated cost savings to agencies about $500 to $1 billion. So I'm just curious if there is something that we all collectively can do more to not just, of course, ease the supply constraint, but ultimately, if sponsorships don't happen, the marketplace will not grow. So I would be very interested in your comments on that. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So and there are organizations that, that are more amenable to sponsorship opportunities. And you can see it. Obviously, there's data that exists that says, okay, this CFO Act agency is much more prone to, adoption of new technologies and being willing to go through the authorization process. And that's typically those folks that are, pretty well funded, that have a more publicly visible mission. But there are also folks that aren't. What seems to be the stumbling block, in my view, and this is just me based upon my observations across the FSUB, is it's dependent upon how the organizations view the difficulty of going through the process, both internally and externally, and what is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? And one of the things that that we often forget about on the federal side is the amount of, as Karen was alluding to, the amount of money that these vendors have spent to go through this process, and the assumption that on the other side there will be revenue, like the field of dreams, build it and we will come, sort of thing. But if there's no sponsorship, that becomes a problem. So that then acts as the discouragement on other organizations that have really neat technologies that can help the government drive down costs exponentially, that are unwilling to enter the federal marketplace because of the onerousness of the process, which we're all dearly hoping that the new FedRAMP process at least begins to address. I mean, this is the government. The last thing you want the government doing is shooting from the hip. Bureaucracy exists for a reason, is to slow down the decision-making process to the point to where it actually, makes sense and affects everybody equally. Again, they're trying to spread peanut butter across a piece of bread that has a lot of nooks and crannies in it. So they're trying to get the most across, everybody get the most benefit from doing that. The interesting part of this is having been on that side, there are other benefits for organizations that have nothing to do with the U.S. government, that have nothing to do with doing business or deriving revenue from the FedRAMP process. If you talk, having been on that side, if you talk to large scale organizations and they want to drag you through their third-party risk assessment knothole, and there are some ones out there that are much more onerous than the government is. The fact that you say, hey, listen, I'm FedRAMP or I'm FedRAMP ready, short circuits a lot of that conversation. If you're working in Singapore, they love FedRAMP ready. If you're working in Australia, they love FedRAMP ready. If you're working in Europe, they love FedRAMP ready, because especially in Germany, that short circuits a lot of that third-party risk conversation. So there's some pros to this that maybe offset the pain a little bit. But from our perspective on the government side, we need to be much more open to talking about sponsorship, but making it easier to do so. And that's what we're we're hoping that this does. And, I talked to a lot of other federal CISOs and, CFI Act agencies, and, I'm like, why don't you take my ATOs? Or why don't you take, this person's ATO? And again, it's down at the, it's basically the reciprocity and the trust. And, at some point in time, we're going to have to, get to the point to where we're just going to have to say, hey, listen, an ATO is an ATO. I don't care who you are, you're going to take it. So,
Laura and Zari, I think this gets a little bit to the metrics and a little bit to the kind of, what can we do? But any thoughts on how you can help us tell your story more broadly? And if not, that's fine. We have another session coming up soon.
I was blown away by Stan.
All right, guys, any closing thoughts?
I think just thank you all so much for this kind of engagement, for these very thoughtful questions. I mean, I'm certainly going to be taking back how we can kind of all work together to tell the story a little bit better, and amongst many of the other things shared here today. So thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thank you guys, and big round of applause for everybody. We're very excited to see the memo. Stay tuned, and we'll meet you up again. Thank you very much.